Aquí se apagó uno. Todo. Sí. Yeah. See, everybody's here.
Welcome, everyone. So as we are getting ready, we will be with you in just a few minutes. If we'll give about until just 3 more minutes, and we'll be getting started.
Shirley, you need to give me access to sharing my screen.
Oh, yes. 1 second.
And how many do we have? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Fernando Zacarias. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is going to be complex but interesting. As you can see by the title, we are going to have a discussion on systems thinking, theory U, and the complexity of HIV prevention as an example. And we have 3 speakers, 3 mentors, and 1 mentee. And we will be introducing the different people at the different times. But you can see that as part of the presenters, the participants are also thinkers and presenters. We're going to have some breakout rooms to discuss a few questions and then come back. Okay, this is my bio data, and I will go very shortly. The important point is that each one of the numerals, Roman numerals, illustrates a part of my life. I'm not going to repeat anything. Number 1 is the phase of 18 years as a medical student, a medical professional, a clinician, 18 years. Then the part in which I was an international public health worker, and that lasted 33 years, and then you can see all the details. I show this because it's the time when I was working on sexually transmitted diseases and HIV and AIDS. I was there at the beginning of the epidemic at the Center for Disease Control. And the most important part of my life is the 7 years thus far of being the principal mentor and program coordinator on multiple mentoring. And this is because of all of you. Now I'm going to introduce Shirley Bejarano, the young lady who gave you the welcome and the first instructions. And you can see here her bio data. She's currently the Director of Education and Prevention department at the AIDS Center of Queens County, New York. And she's been with us since 2017, first as my first mentee in the program, and then as a technical officer, and now she's helping me with the coordination of the program. But she can see that she has a trajectory of being a founder and an institution builder, the Global Health Next Generation Network, and then she's part of Women in Global Health and the Coalition for Global Health Innovation, which is a daughter of Multipod Mentoring. She's an anthropologist and has 2 master's degrees in public health. So you can see that she's really, really into the field. And I want to introduce also Charlie Shang. She's right now, she's helping with the technical coordination of the meeting, the technical aspects. And she had a Bachelor of Arts in European Studies at Maastricht University. And you can see that she also has a trajectory, despite her own age, of working in many areas, very committed from the social and political standpoint, working with the local government of Maastricht in the Netherlands, and with Multipod. She was also a mentee. Now she's a technical officer in communication. And in addition to that, she was also a mentee for a few years. As I mentioned before, you can continue being a young professional in the program or student in the program for more than 1 year. Now, the purpose of this webinar is we want to share, especially with our younger colleagues, 2 tools, 2 thinking tools that you can apply to address present and future problems in global health and human development issues in the 21st century. I continue to emphasize that you are the ones in charge of this century. And the justification for that is because we have a body of multidisciplinary students and young people and mentors, which are going to use their knowledge, their commitment, their advocacy skills, their activism, and their action, energy, and talent to solve these problems. The objectives were 3, and now, thanks to Shirley, there are 4. One is to explore the tools and the methods of systemic thinking and theory U. The second one is to promote their application in the solution of complex global health and human development problems. And the third one, to initiate a process, because if you like, and if you think that these approaches are useful, we want to implement, test, and evaluate these approaches with specific problems that you identify. And this is a 4th and very important objective. We want to continue to stimulate collaboration between the young professionals and mentors in the program in the design and implementation of future Multipod webinars. The reason we're having 4 speakers, all testosterone, is because that was the way this webinar was born. The idea came simultaneously from mentor Jose Romero about the theory U, and from Maxime Mistreta from the Institut Pasteur about systems thinking. So that's the reason we did that. So I go very shortly over the agenda. The webinar is going to last 90 minutes, but it may last 100 minutes because we have special guests that I will introduce later that is going to present us with a great opportunity for all of us. So I will start with a presentation on the 2 epidemics, and I won't tell you what the 2 epidemics are because you will know that. Then Maxime is going to present the system thinking, the methodology, and he will illustrate the problem. And then we'll have the first breakout groups and a plenary in 15 minutes. Then we will have Dr. Massin, Rafael Massin, another mentor, talking about the complexities of HIV prevention today, especially today that we're having a pandemic of COVID-19. And you will see how interesting and how challenging his 4 questions are going to be. And then we have the theory U and the systemic approaches to HIV/AIDS prevention. But one of the initiators of this webinar, Dr. Jose Romero Keith, also another mentor. And the second group and breakout, and then finally, we will have the conclusions. And then Kathy Wabnitz, one of our mentees, a young professional, now a student at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, is going to give us that opportunity. And I won't give you a preview because I want her to tell us what she has to offer to all of us. Okay. The dynamics, this is not a regular webinar. Okay, this is a webinar in which is going to be a learning immersion into new methodology. And this is going to sound a little bit different to what you are used to, because all of you or most of you are scientists. This has to do with the total involvement of you in the solution of problems. And Dr. Romero is going to explain what the theory U is. And I already mentioned the sequence of the presentation, but the most important part is that the breakout groups are going to be assigned at random, and you're going to have 10 minutes to discuss the question and then come back and report. But they will give you more details on that. Now I start. This is a book, no, you cannot see, from Giovanni de Vigo from 1514 about the great pox or the French disease. Let me read for you. In the year of our Lord, 1494, in the month of December, when Charles, the French king, took his journey into parts of Italy to recover the kingdom of Naples, there appeared a certain disease throughout all Italy of an unknown nature. This disease is contagious, chiefly if it shows through copulation of a man with an unclean woman, for the beginning thereof was in the secret members of men and women, which pustules could not be healed by medicine applied within or without, but that they would embrace the whole body with ulceration of the genital parts, ever returning again after they were healed. And here on the left side, you can see an illustration by Albrecht Dürer of a man, a mercenary, with all the pustules, the lesions of secondary syphilis. Now, 2.5 years later, the French philosopher Voltaire wrote, on their flippant way through Italy, the French carelessly picked up Genoa, Naples, and syphilis. Now, why did this happen? This was the syphilis epidemic at the very end of the 15th century and the 16th century and beyond. The accepted theory by almost everybody is that it's a disease that came from the Americas. The Columbus sailors had sex with Native American women with syphilis and got infected. Now, why did I get infected? I'm going to give you a very short course on infectious diseases in only 4 words: vulnerability, risk, knowledge, and behavior. Why did it happen? Because this was a new disease. The sailors had no protection. It was highly contagious. It was highly pathogenic, very severe, and there was no cure. Second, the risk was multiple partners, and some of them were infected. Knowledge, the sailors had no idea, I'm sure, of what was going on. About prevention, risk, etiology, they were not aware of what was happening, and they had poor hygiene. And then the behavior was unprotected sex with multiple partners, or one partner that was infected. Now, when the sailors returned to Spain, and some of them to Italy, some of them, of course, had sex with their wives. They infected some of the wives, some of them got pregnant, and then the babies were infected via the mother. That would have been the end of the epidemic, because the children will not transmitted the the infection to anybody else. But sailors had sex with other women, and most importantly, they had sex with prostitutes, which are now called sex workers, and they were infected. Now, sex workers follow the armies, and of course, there were mercenaries infected, and these mercenaries, I'm sorry, and the sex workers, of course, had sex with many men, and the mercenaries took the infection to people in other countries. For example, the ones who went to Italy were Belgian, French, German, Austrian, from different countries. And then when they went back, they infected other people. Other women were infected. So the question is, could syphilis have been averted, prevented in Europe? And let me show you something. No. Once they got established in the different communities, it expanded because there was no treatment, no cure, nothing else to do. Okay, so this is also an illustration, very old illustration, and here is for the Christians is a Virgin Mary and Child Jesus, and these are two repentant sex workers, and this man is beyond help. And here's one of the treatments that were used. It was like a sauna, and then this man was putting water, and then sometimes they put mercury salts or something else. And because of that, some patients died, and so the cure was worse than the disease. Now, let's move 450 years later, again, soldiers and sex workers. And this is a very famous poster. She may look clean, but pickups, good type girls, and prostitutes spread syphilis and gonorrhea. And it says here, you cannot beat the Axis if you get VD. And in this case, you can see soldiers, syphilis, and of course, not all of them have it, but they say all of these men have it. Women, stay away from dance halls because they can seduce you, you can have sex, and then you will be in trouble. Some of the comics also illustrated that, and the one on the left is a very good comic because it gives very good information about syphilis, the symptoms, and what to do. The other one in Spanish is a woman from the street. And it is funny because this one on the left, this was called I Know Everything About Women, and of course they didn't. Okay, now let's move 40 years, and here we have three men. One is Liberace Lee, a piano artist in Las Vegas, very flamboyant, and he died of AIDS. Then we had the wonderful Freddie Mercury of Queen, and he also died of AIDS. This is a basketball player from Los Angeles, Magic Johnson, and he also acquired AIDS. The point is that in 81, the first cases were identified by scientists and epidemiologists at CDC. And they very, very early found out that it was a cellular immune dysfunction acquired through sexual contact. But the most important part is that within 1.5 years, we knew the ways to prevent it. And it's because epidemiology is the central science of public health. And thanks to that, we knew what to prevent this new disease. Because it was easy to find out that it was transmitted through homosexual in the US and heterosexual in other parts of the world, Africa, for example, among drug users, and of course, the people who receive contaminated blood, a transfusion, and from an infected mother to the child. What was important is the progression of our knowledge about that. The first three images, this is pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. This is an emaciated patient, and this is a form of cancer, of skin cancer called Kaposi sarcoma, which is quite rare. And 2 years later, in 83, the virus, the retrovirus, was isolated. And here you see pink particles infecting a T cell. 2 years later, in 85, the HIV test was available, and then there was a way to really be able to diagnose the disease. We learned about HIV progression, and finally, in 1996, there were some cocktails, very complex, very complicated to apply, that could be used to treat the disease so that people didn't die the same way they died before. But what was also important is that some of the first symptoms for patients were despair, loneliness, and hopelessness. It still hurts. But on the other side, this is the first time that I know as a physician that individuals have been recognized. And this is a project called the Quilt, the NAMES project. And every year they came to Washington, and in the mall, this is the Washington Monument, they put the quilts with the names of individuals, mostly men here in the US, that have died because of AIDS. And here you see Freddie Mercury, and this family, they lost 2 sons, and you see all the different names. And it was a kind of recognition and homage to their lives. And finally, AIDS brought a social mobilization that we hadn't seen before with the disease. And it was actually the communities, the ones who engaged and make sure that the governments responded to the pandemic. Finally, I want to show you this contrast between the two epidemics. We talk about the discovery in the 15th century, and then AIDS in 1981. The severity and the social fear were very similar. The people who were blamed for that were prostitutes, sailors, soldiers, mercenaries, in this case, gay men or men who have sex with men, sex workers, IV drug users, as the primary key populations. And then transmission the same way. The agent, it took 411 years for scientists to be able to see it. And in the case of the HIV, it was 2 years. The diagnosis, the clinical, was almost immediate. There was a disease, French, Neapolitan disease, Italian disease, Spanish disease, etc. And it took 412 years to count on a laboratory test. In the case of HIV, it took only 4 years. Effective treatment, although at the beginning of the last century, there was salvarsan and neosalvarsan arsenicals that were used. They were very toxic, and they really didn't cure the disease. So in 43, when we had penicillin, penicillin continues to be the drug that can cure syphilis, but it took 4.5 centuries. In the case of HIV, only 15 years. And here I want to reiterate the same concepts I mentioned before. And they have to do with vulnerability and risk for transmission, and with knowledge and behavior. And these are socially complex problems, so it's not as easy as 4 words. And Dr. Masin is going to talk about what goes in here and what are the factors that can preclude prevention. So with this, I end my presentation, and I want to introduce the next speakers. Speaker, which is Maxime Mistreta, one of the generators of this webinar. As you can see, he's a master in bioengineering and an engineer first in a private company, and then an engineer at the Institut Pasteur in Paris. And now he's a PhD candidate. And as you can see, he's been working on infectious diseases from the very beginning. What I like most about Maxime is that he's the one who is going to expose us to system thinking, and that he's a fan of innovation and philosophy. Maxime, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt really quick. I just
Oh,
wanted
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't give you the floor, Shirley. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
To give some instructions. I'm sorry about that.
No, no problem. I know we're all trying to move quickly. Just a quick reminder, as you probably saw on Charlie's in the chart, a message from Charlie. If you have any questions, which I already see we have one, please feel free to put your question in the chat. Otherwise, we can do the question if we don't have too many right after Maxime's presentation. So far, we only have one, and you can just raise your hand, turn on your video and raise your hand like this, or you can raise your hand in the participants feature. If you click on the participants feature at the very bottom of the Zoom screen, and when you click on it, you should have the option to raise your hand, and you'll find that at the very right of your screen at the bottom. So I say the easiest way: turn on your video, see your lovely face, and raise your hand. But of course, you can put in your question in the chat. And we can answer the question for Dr. Zacarias, and any questions that you have for Maxime after Maxime's presentation. So please go ahead, Maxime.
Okay. So just share my screen. Okay, so Dr. Zacarias speak to us about epidemics and the complexity of it. Now I want to speak about complexity too, but on another aspect, more on the methodology, how to approach complex system and complex problem. So as epidemics, all the issues we can face now, like global warming, injustice and inequalities in our society, or all these aspects are complex problems, and they can be difficult to approach, to understand, and end up to really polarized opinion and monocausal explanation. As for the epidemics, we see it's the fault of a sex worker, of soldier, this kind of explanation. And I think we need to integrate more complexity in all the issues, all the challenge we face, even outside of this big topic, but also in how we deal with problematic inside of our companies, our social circle, family, etc. There is a level of complexity at each level of our life. And at the same moment where we see very polarized opinion, we have also an access to knowledge bigger than ever. We have access to political science, philosophy, economic, marketing, science, biology, sociology, etc. We have a huge access to that. And it might be complicated to know in which topic, how to find the good lens to look at the world. Also, we have our own domain of expertise, and we might think at some point that our domain might be the good one to explain all the aspects of the world, but we need to integrate the complexity of all these disciplines to have a coherent vision of the world. And another thing is, once you have articulated your thought, you need to communicate about it. And for that, there is also the place behind fact to the feeling, to the value of the person that listens to you, or has a huge impact on the way they will perceive your message and what you want to communicate. So in front of such complexity, I think we can end up in two places where or we go for a really simplistic vision of the world who are easier to communicate, or we can feel a bit discouraged in front of complexity and say, okay, it's too difficult, I give up. And here today, I would like to speak about another vision of the problem where we could appreciate, handle a bit the complexity. But to speak about that, first, I need to go back to how do we deal with a problem? Okay, we learn at school a very efficient way to deal with problem is called reductionism. So reductionism, what is it? It can be called analytical thinking. You see a problem, you cut it in small pieces, and you try to understand each piece separately. And when you assemble them, you can understand better the bigger problem. That's what you can do with a watch, for example. If you dismantle a watch, you will try to understand how works each compound. And when you reassemble it, you are able to understand how the watch works. And you can repair it even, which is great. And it's really efficient. It can reduce the cost of thinking about it to find solution. And it's worked really well with system with a low level of interconnection. For example, in a watch, each element will have a connection with one another element and you will have a chain. But most of the system and most of the challenge we face are not watch. They are more complicated than that. I could say they are closer maybe to a forest, for example. How you will think about a forest as a system. I think we need, in this case, to see differently. And the forest is not the sum of its compound. It's more than that, because each individual species, gas exchange, etc. There is a high level of exchange between all these elements, and that makes the forest. And the forest can be more described by the interconnection between the individual as a network than its element inside. Okay, and what is great with this system approach, it's you can start to see what is called nonlinear properties, that your system will react to modification in a difficult to predict way and nonlinear. Okay, so I tell you that, maybe you think, yeah, it's cool, but why it would be useful in a way to deal with the world? And finally, reductionism is working quite well. Why not to use that? And I would like to tell you a little story about that. So it was in India, in Delhi, under the British rule. They had a problem. They had a high number of cobra in the street of Delhi. You can imagine that it's quite a big problem. And they wanted to reduce the number of cobra. So they offer a bounty for each dead cobra bring to the administration. So at first, the number of cobra decreased in the street. That was a good news. But do you have an idea of what side effect had this policy on the city? And I would like to give you a little minute to give idea if you have some idea about what have been the effect of this policy on the city and the unexpected effect actually it had. If someone has an idea, want to write something in the chat about that, or even take a yes, there is answer. More rats. Oh yeah, that could be actually a problem. Yeah, actually, what happened? Yeah, I've actually what happened is at the end, the snake didn't vanish, and that's interesting because when they create a bounty for dead cobra, people start to breed cobra. So people start to set up farm in the city to breed cobra and bring them to the office to get the bounty. And when the government learned about that, they stop to give a bounty. So the people release the cobra in the streets. So at the end of it, they had more cobra in the street than before this policy. And what I want to show with this example is when, yeah, market for someone write a market for snakes. Actually, yeah, it was something that they create a commercial activity from it. So yeah, from this reductionist approach, okay, we have a problem, we will create a simple answer to this challenge. They end up to have a worse solution. So the solution they had up were the problem they had to solve the next day. So I think that's a good example of why it's important to introduce complex and system thinking in our way to deal with the problem, because this reductionist approach can cause more problem than it solves it, okay? So just once we said, okay, system thinking is better to understand the world, how to analyze a system, because it's very complicated, very several level. So the first level, we said the individual, as in reductionism, you have an individual composing your system. This individual will have behavior, personal belief, way to act, and maybe a feeling of freedom in their way to behave, and variation from individual to another. At the next level, you have a structural level with institutions, structure, who have an impact on the behavior of the person, of the element of the system. And you can have an impact with that, with, for example, nudge. It's an example where, for example, in the subway, you will have mark to push people to adopt certain behavior. It's a way to push people in to adopt certain way of behave. And at the last level, you have the paradigm with the culture, the value, the axiom underlying this system. For example, we live in a democracy. There is some value associated to that, capitalism with other value, etc. So the structure of this several level will generate some properties like homeostasis, for example. That's a system will try to maintain its state as it is, even in case of modification. Or feedback loop will increase the effect of one action and create a loop. And that will create nonlinear properties. For example, with pollution, when you have a forest, if you start to have more and more pollution in the forest, you won't have a linear killing of the animal or the species inside, but you will reach at some threshold. And when you reach a threshold, your forest will move from one state of equilibrium to another one. And you can have a massive killing or massive change of population inside in the forest with residents. So why I think it's really important to have this global approach of the problem. I think for strategy selection, it's important because we need to take in account the side effect of our politics on the system to select the strategy, but also to identify the several layers of action to have a coherent strategy who is not targeting only individuals or not targeting only structure, but trying to play on this different level to have a global effect on the system and to move the state of equilibrium of this system. Okay. And also as a person, I think thinking problem as in a systemic manner is also a great way to get out of inaction, apathy, frustration, or even discouragement, because the system are not linear in their answer. You can feel that your action is totally useless. And I think by adopting this way of thinking the world more systemic, you can understand better what is the power of your action and give more sense to it. So just to conclude a bit, so the idea is to say, okay, there is several layers, as I said. You have data, it's number. From this data, you can create information. You give a sense to the number. You can create knowledge by creating link between your information. When you want to modify or to have an impact, you can identify some point where you can act. It's insight. You can understand what is the connection between your different insights. We call it wisdom. And I think, and that may be because I'm an engineer, but I think the next level is to say, I understand all the interconnection of my system. I know how to modify them to have the effect that I want. Okay. So now I would like to do a little warming exercise, and we will split in different group. And I would like you to discuss this Cobra example and try to address it with a systemic approach and identify the different layer and how could it be thought through the systemic way of thinking. So surely I will give you the space to speak now to explain a bit more how it will.
Yes. So I wanted to also just have reach out to everyone and see if you had any questions before we go into our breakout rooms for Maxime and Dr. Zacarias. And again, you can see. Well, we can't see everyone right now, but please, you feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask your question as well.
We can, this is Jose, Shirley. We can also address the questions in the workout, in the breakup group. So we have both options, whatever you decide, but that opens up the discussion forum.
Okay, so we just had one question. I wanted to just go back. We had one question for Dr. Zacarias, and this question is from Mark. And he is asking why we assume that it was given from American women to European men. And I'm assuming that the question is referring to the transmission of HIV.
Okay. Mark, as you know, there are two theories. One of them is that syphilis was already in Europe at that time because they found some evidence in bones or possible evidence in bones that show the remnants of osteoitis in some of them. But some people who have examined them still think that it was a different kind of treponema, the one that we had in the Americas. The same way we had Treponema carateum for the karate in Mexico and Mesoamerica, and you had the behel in parts of Northern Africa, and of course yaws all over the world, but especially in the countries in Africa. So nobody can say 100% where it originated, but it's not far-fetched to think that there were different types of spirochetes in different parts of the world. The reason I put that is because it illustrates very well how an epidemic can disseminate and how you start from a few cases and they continue to expand and disseminate in a population. So we can discuss the theories in another occasion, but I really appreciate the question because people will know that nothing is 100%. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zacarias. So we will now go into a breakout of 5 groups. And each of us, the speakers will be a facilitator. So just give me 1 second and we can put everyone into a breakout room.
In the meantime, I want to tell everybody that we are recording the webinar. That's what we asked you if it was okay to take your names and images. And we only have a few faces on the screen. So at some point, we are going to ask everybody to put on their video so that we can see you and we can take a picture of everybody. We can do that at the end, but I usually with my mentees like to see them because body language is important. But right now it's up to you, but at the end, even for 1 second, I would like everybody to show that he or she participated in this webinar, and we can take a screenshot and have you record it. Oh, Christian, how are you? Okay, good.
So now we will break out into rooms.
We are back, I think.
Hey, welcome back, everyone.
Okay. So everyone is back, or there is still people in the shared?
I think everyone is back now. I think some people had to leave. But thank you to those who did join at the beginning.
Mm.
So, okay, I think everyone is back now. So please, you can proceed with the agenda.
Yeah, so now the idea was to share a bit what happened, which interesting insight or insight what happened during the breakup room, and if you want to share some insight or discovery you had there.
So perhaps we can just start with whoever was in group 1, and you can share. And if you could just share one of the most significant parts that you thought or points that was discussed.
We probably don't need to go in sequential order. If
No, it doesn't
anyone,
matter.
no, if anyone wants to share, we had like a very rich discussion. So, if not, maybe you can start it on. Just unmute.
Yeah, no, I mean, sure, I'll be glad to. This is, we were at group 3. I think that the gist of our discussion was that this is not a binary selection. In other words, it's not you either use systems or use reductionism. Systems are probably better to understand the diagnosis, so to speak, but when you have to get into the intervention properly, you probably need some elements of reductionism. And the art, more than the science, is what is the proper level of equilibrium. And we discussed a couple of examples that some of us had about participation, particularly with people of different cultures, where you think you have everybody will understand what you're saying, but they don't. So I think that I would think that was the main point. So it's not a drop reductionism, but have an intelligent combination of both in order to tackle your problem. I hope if anybody in the group has any divergent comment or whatever, or complementary, please go ahead.
Yes, I have something. So I'm from group 2 with Dr. Masin and Ubelo. And our discussion, I think from my background is in European Union politics and law, and I myself is an activist for social justice. So my approach is that I think it's very important when the government is making decisions, it's important to include people from marginalized groups and people who are actually affected by this policy and regulations. And also another point is that when the government is asking for advice from experts, it's important to make sure that, for example, in the case of this cobra case, then for example, the farmers who are keeping the cobras and the animal rights groups and the scientists who know a lot about the ecosystem that's concerning the cobra and the decrease in cobra lives amount population. And also like in the case of like COVID, for example, then we need to have obviously public health experts and also economists and also social justice activists and people who are in marginalized groups, people who are living under the poverty line. How does, for example, lockdown would affect, or working from home would affect wage workers. And so it's always important to have like an intersectional and diverse group of people and also experts from different fields.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I was in a group with Ify and Shirley. And yeah, we also said that the actual problem behind it was the poverty of the people. So they just saw like a way to get out of it, maybe for a moment at least, to breed money, as Shirley said. I thought that was a very nice phrasing of it. And it's so important to bring in, yeah, different angles and to take the issue and, yeah, twist it and maybe then prevent other issues that can arise from the first solution. I think Maxime said that solutions can sometimes cause problems, and that's the perfect example for it.
Did we get everyone from each group?
Maybe from my group, I don't know, Ines or Ernst, if you want to share something that we discussed. Okay, me, I would like to share a bit something that what we discussed. I think was interesting. Was okay. We see the snake as a problem itself in this situation, and how we think about the role in the ecosystem of the cobra, and also how the city itself can be think to be more or less cobra friendly, let's say, and also thinking about the problem in this manner and not trying to solve directly and eliminate cobra, but trying maybe to think more as a structure, how you design the city, the urbanism, or this kind of thing, who would be also maybe an interesting aspect to question.
What we saw in the discussion in the group with Charlie is that this is the quintessential example of what happens with a decision, a policy decision is made top down without identifying what are the consequences of any action taken, or why the action is taken. Why are the cobras collected and killed? Are they killed because they scared the British? Are they killed because they buy the children or the cattle? Or just because there are too many and they pollute the landscape? At the same time, the reduction in the cobras has an impact in the growth of vermin, for example, rats and mice that eat the grain. So these type of decisions must be done in consultation with all the stakeholders. And the stakeholders were very well defined by Charlie. It's not only the community at large, it's even animal rights activists and ecologists who can explain what's the impact in the ecosystem of eliminating one important element that makes part of it.
We had this, sorry, I'm from South Africa.
I think Hans would like to add.
Yeah, just a cobra example that happened recently in South Africa, where I'm from, was during lockdown, smoking was banned, so you couldn't buy cigarettes. But immediately a black market developed. My neighbor here across the road, she was a big supplier, and she got her cigarettes from the police. So you created criminals, and now there's a bigger black market for cigarettes than the official market where the government gets tax on. So the solution was worse than the problem.
Thank you, Hans.
Yeah, I think that was another quintessential example. That's perfect. If we don't have any other comments or questions, I think we can move on. Actually, I wanted to ask, I thought I saw Haruko's hand. Did you raise your hand to ask? No? Okay, great. All right, so now we can just move on with the agenda if you're okay with that, Maxime? If you're done, yeah?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So I know that we're moving on with Rafael. I think Maxine introduces Rafael. Is that correct?
I didn't. I forget. I will share that immediately. It's here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So about Rafael Zin. So he's a medical doctor from National Autonomous University of Mexico. After he did master in public health in the School of Public Health in Washington, D.C. And after that, he worked as an advisor on HIV, STI, and viral hepatitis for the Pan American Health Organization, and work now as an independent consultant in the area of evaluation of HIV. So he's a really well-known expert in prevention, and especially HIV. And he have also a deep interest in language, and Western and Middle Eastern music. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I have the, okay. I'm absolutely convinced that it's not something that you don't know, that we are living very complex times. We are facing a pandemic that is caused by a very contagious agent, and is limiting our social interactions. We have to stay in confined spaces. We cannot socialize, and the whole fabric of society is being affected by this pandemic. But at the same time that we deal with this COVID-19 pandemic, we are still dealing with the HIV pandemic. In fact, it's not gone, despite the fact that many people say in few years we will not be dealing with HIV when it started, and by 1995 or 2000. We are 40 years into the HIV epidemic, and by 2015, it was estimated that 2 million new cases occurred during that year, which is a lot of new cases. And in 2017, there was a slight decrease, but this was just estimate. And in 1 year, we had 1.8 new cases. And in 2019, just 1 year ago, the UN joint program on HIV and the World Health Organization estimated that in that year, 1.7 1.7 million new cases have occurred. This is a very, very meager reduction. And if we think that by 2000, the governments of all over the globe had declared that by 2005, the HIV epidemic would have been halted and started to revert. I don't want to be cynical, but I don't see the significant reduction. We're still dealing with a serious situation. You see that there are 38 million people living with HIV in 2019, and this is a big number, a big figure. But this big figure is represented by all the people who have been receiving treatment that doesn't cure the problem, just extends the lives of the people infected. So we have all those individuals, which constitutes the global prevalence of infection, but the new cases, the incident cases are 1.7 million. When we know how to stop the transmission of this infection, which is much, the agent, the HIV, is less transmissible than COVID or than hepatitis B. And we still see a lot of HIV related deaths, 690,000 in 1 year. This is a lot again. So the epidemic, I'm sorry, but has not been halted and is affecting key populations and groups that have, as Dr. Zacharias mentioned, more risk, more vulnerability, and they are disproportionately impacted. Youth is also touched in a very significant manner because they have absent knowledge or defective knowledge. Many young people think that the problem has already been jugulated, has been eliminated. And in addition to that, they don't have enough negotiation skills and agency. Agency meaning the capacity to make informed decisions and to control their sexuality, their health, their lives. So we still deal with these challenges. And in addition to that, data and information are not completely trustworthy. Maybe we have more cases that are officially estimated. In addition to that, I wonder if prevention is a priority. I hear many people, even experts in public health, who say that prevention based on behavioral change doesn't work. Imagine if someone says that social distancing and wearing masks doesn't work and we have to wait for vaccines and for treatments. Well, same with HIV. Many people still say that we have to put all our investments on treatments, including pre-exposure population prophylaxis, and post-exposure. And they even forget that other STIs exist and don't care about those interventions. So there is a big imbalance in prioritization of prevention and investments for it. Prevention is complex, as Maxime said, very, very complex. It doesn't obey a linear logic. We cannot say that if A plus B equals C, meaning if you convince people to wear condoms and you give them the condoms, you stop the epidemic. It doesn't work like that. When we work in prevention, we have to use a modal logic in which we think about vulnerability, risk, transmission, but also motivation, behavior, and other complex phenomena like, for example, subjective aspects of the individual behavior like beliefs, convictions, desires, attraction. I like this person, so I want to have sex with him or her because I don't want to let the opportunity pass. Or the situation I'm having in this moment 5 years. So after 5 years, all my defenses decrease and my attraction to people augments. So I lose my agency. So in terms of domains of prevention, we need to think about, of course, risk, vulnerability, but also about the self-efficacy, which is the capacity to make informed decisions, and motivation, which are also impacted by complex external phenomena. Pretty much like the COBRA, we have the authorities, we have the community, we have the peers impacting my decisions. And in this scheme, we have the same elements, the same aspects, including the infectivity of the virus and the susceptibility of host. And what does this mean? That there are some biological factors like the presence of an STI that facilitates the entry of the virus, but also the level of biological development. A young woman has a genital tract which is thinner, less developed, so it allows more easily the entry of the HIV. So we have a series of factors that we can build a tree of problems and see how each one of those elements plays a specific role in the transmission of HIV through unprotected sex or skin piercing practices. When we talk about the domains in prevention of HIV transmission, we need to think about the biomedical aspects, the exposure, the inoculum, the infectivity, the virulence, also the individual factors, how much the person knows, his, her level of agency, skills, but also the interpersonal and network aspects of his, her sexual behavior, the role of community modulating norms and offering facilitation or obstruction to behavior, and structural poverty, educational system, resources for prevention. I saw, for example, in a country I visited recently, very young girl in high school having sex with older men, and I'm talking about poverty. This is a structural factor with older men because they don't have money to buy, don't mention shoes, they don't have money to buy hygienic pads for menstruation. So they resource to this type of exchange for a little bit of money. So we have a lot of possible interventions that can be implemented, and they are based on biomedical interventions, but not only on biomedical. We need to impact knowledge. We need to empower communities or facilitate rather the empowerment of communities. We need to facilitate the building of enabling environments, removing barriers. We need to act on political agendas. We need to contribute to the development of critical thinking, filtering the information and preventing people from absorbing myths and stupid concepts. And for that, young people are the most prominent agents of change. There are many challenges on HIV prevention. I think I would like to mention at least one here, which is the syndrome of prevention fatigue that we are seeing with the COVID epidemic. We are all fed up. We want to go out, we want to go places, we want to visit the family. The same thing can happen with HIV prevention. So we need to think how to add charm, how to add sexiness, how to add eroticism to HIV prevention to reduce the syndrome of prevention fatigue. There are some theoretical models that are intended as tools for HIV prevention. We have worked, and programs and projects have used these models that are intended to improve the capacity of people to think better, to plan what they want to do, to contemplate changes, and to have elements to start acting and provide them with elements to sustain the change. But there are also some models intended to impact the macro level. And these models, believe it or not, have been developed by the community, not by the projects, not by the programs, but by the community at large. I would mention as an apart the youth theory that Jose will describe to you in a moment, but the youth theory is an integrative approach that addresses objective and subjective elements associated to risk, vulnerability, and behavioral charge. And I finished this posing some few questions to you. We all agree that COVID-19 has changed things, and we don't know to what point it has impacted HIV prevention. We certainly don't know. I want to see the numbers that UNAIDS and the World Health Organization will give us next year about what happened in 2020. But I am thinking about the key populations. And I started seeing this as a serious questioning on what they do to stay safe of both conditions. What happens with sex workers, the women and men who exchange sex for money or for goods? Is it possible to tell them to quarantine and stay secluded in a place? Or do we tell them to wear a mask and go and look for clients? And how do they practice this transactional sex? If the client asks for oral sex, what should the sex worker do? I don't know. And what about men who have sex with men? Are they cruising more through social media? Are they using those applications in which they find other men and they go to places? Maybe they do like a contract and say, I will see only you and no one else, so we are safe of HIV and COVID. I don't know. Maybe the quarantine is contributing to solidify monogamic relationships. Maybe. And who should outreach to those populations? And what about people who inject drugs? Are they obtaining their drugs from someone who come home with the drugs and the needles? Is there a Uber drug? I don't think so. We have Uber food, but what about them? I don't know. And what about young people? Young people are bags of hormones. They want to date. They want to have sex. They want to make their sexual debut. What are the recommendations we're making to them? How can we address these challenges? I have no preconceived responses to these because I am sure you have better responses than I would have. I'm proposing these as questions for discussions in small groups. But I probably will pass the ball to my colleague, Jose Romero Keith, who has a PhD in sociology of education, who started working in the international level in the field of HIV prevention too. But his role was much more interesting than mine because my counterparts were governments, and Jose worked with governments and NGOs. And now he has been doing a nice job with capacity development in Latin America and the Caribbean, and using this theory, working on and transformational leadership in different spaces and with United Nations agencies. On a more personal touch, I would say that working with Jose is a delight, because he's the most patient person I have known in centuries. Patient, relaxed, easygoing, and open to learn and open to share. So it's my privilege to give the floor to him.
Thank you. Thank you. Rafa, thank you so much for your words. Thank you. So, we've heard about complexity, and we've heard about reductionism, and we've heard about different examples. And now I want to introduce you to Theory U as one way of approaching complexities. I will give you an example of how we've done it and been working with them, and we can ponder together how far we have gotten and how far we also want to get, no? And I will invite you not to forget Rafael's questions on sex workers, on men that have sex with other men, on drug users, young men and women, because we'll approach them later on, and we'll be taking these tools so that we can go into breakup groups and wrap up the relationship between theory and practice. So what is it that fascinates me about Theory U, since I had the chance to come into contact with it 6 years ago? First of all, it connects theory with practice. And this is understood by many as the dilemma of our current times. We have a lot of theory, we have a lot of solutions, but we also have a lot of problems taking those into practice, going into the field. Theory U connects methods with tools. It works very hard on its methodological approach, but it also has worked for years, close to 15 years, on the development and validation of very concrete tools. We'll see some of them later. It balances the what and the how. And as Maxine was saying, when we see complexity, it gives us tools to go into the relationship between hope and future. No, it does not allow us to stay there in the midst of the complexity of theory, but gives us a way forward. So it is summarized as the art of implementation. And let me tell you a story about it. Created by Professor Sharma from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at MIT. His first book came out in 2009. It's the blue one. And his latest book came out 2018, a couple of years ago. First one refers to the theory of it. Second of it to the method and the tools, the applications, and the lessons learned. So between these two, we have an expansion of close to 15 years of experience validating this dynamic. So how does it actually work? And let me give you an example of complexity, HIV/AIDS prevention, and seafarthers that we had the opportunity to work with, so you can see the very concrete nature of it. 2018, 4 institutions approached us. ITF is a global union, a federation of transport workers, works around the world, integrated by 260 unions in 150 countries, global. MaxISci, a company, private. 2 academies, one in Mexico and one in Peru, and they all said the same, especially when dealing with the academic of IDENA in Mexico. They said, we've done a lot of prevention, we've done a lot of work, we've invested a lot of money, but something is happening that we don't know because we continue to have very high prevention rates on board. Can you help us move forward? We presented them Theory U, asked them if they were okay with the framework and with the tools and the methods, and whether they wanted to try it for a couple of years and see how far we got. We got the green flag, so there we went. Just some data on HIV with C-fathers. C-fathers currently are considered, according to 2018 data, 2 million of them working around the world on board ships. Nigeria has a prevalence of 4.8%, close to the Caribbean data. But according to ITF, 88.8% of them had received information related to HIV, had gone through the prevention modules, no? But in a very recent study, when asked if used the condom in their last non-regular partner, for example, after all that training and after all that investment in Kenya, only 41% were using the condom, while 59% didn't. And something that touches us men very deeply is this fourth question. When asked, man has the absolute right to decide the use of condom. In Guatemala, 70%, India, 39%, Kenya, 28%, which takes us straight into, the issues of machismo and culture and how those are influencing our decisions. Selected this data because it really shows the contradiction between how we are approaching information, how we're approaching HIV, how much we're investing on it, and the types of numbers and the types of results. From the perspective of sociology of education, the word that we use to describe this phenomena is regressive education. Spending on an education that is understood in such a way that it takes us backward instead of forward, very much like the Cobra and the smoking case that Hans just mentioned. So what is Theory U? This is our initial introduction. We have the iceberg model, we have the symptoms, and we have the causes. At an horizontal axis, we have the ecological divides, ecology, social, and spiritual divides. Ecological divides refer to the separation, the division between man and nature. Social divide, the separation between man and others. Spiritual divide, the separation between man and self. These are the three divides that are interrelating in complexity. One example in ecological divide is climate change and its complexity. Social divide, HIV/AIDS, COVID. Spiritual divide, WHO mentioned last year, 800,000 suicides. When we mix the divides, which they interact, we get deep complexities. And as Maxime was saying, when we see them, how do we approach them? How do we approach all these interactions? What is useful to understand the diagnosis of them and then start going into practice? So going into the vertical axis, we're very used to seeing systems, and as Rafael was saying, connecting to structures. We see the symptoms, we see the prevalences, we see 77 million people having received AIDS in 40 years, and we go into the structures. We go into policy, we go into infrastructure, we go into education. But what happens with those two levels that are in the bottom of the iceberg, hidden deep down? thought and source. Thought, the essence of culture. How do we deal with culture? Source, values, the understanding of culture and values and how they're affecting behavior and how they're affecting structures. Theory U is an invitation to open up and go into the nature of these blind spots, into the nature of thought, the nature of source, take them into consideration in our understanding and intervention so we can start approaching complex phenomena in a more multidisciplinary fashion. The method is fantastically simple. It considers 5 movements. Working with our partners, number 1, it's called co-initiation. Who are the social actors? As Charlie was saying, let's bring everyone in. Co-sensing, knowledge. How do we make it systemic? Let's work in that assessment that looks at the symptoms, but goes as deep as is necessary in the complexity that we're working with. Do not have blind spots towards that which is affecting the complexity that we're dealing with. Presencing is one of its innovations, always bringing in innovative thought. What are the tools that make us think differently? How do we go into action? Point number 4. How do we bring the knowledge and put it into action so that we can test it? And how do these 4 elements bring us into an evolution? How do they add up? The very interesting thing about Theory U, I discover, is that we have an invitation to go and to use it in a cyclical way. We can apply it for research to understand. We can apply it to interventions. And we're just invited to do as many cycles as we need, not in a sequential way, but making sure we're going through the 5 of them so that we have the possibility to test the nature of our systemic approach, put innovation tools into our thinking so we're seeing it from different perspectives, and that will take us into innovative action which we can test, and that is a jump into the future. Theory U is actually 2 U's, one big U that I shared with you, and one little U that's at the middle of it, that's at the core of it. In every movement, we bring in emotional intelligence. In every movement, we bring the connection between mind, heart, and will. Mind in itself is science. We welcome science. Mind with the heart is conscious. We welcome science and conscious. Mind, heart, and will is social transformation. So, what's the example when working with seafarers? We worked a year intervention through 3-day learning immersions. We had an agenda, we had a content, we had the curricular structures. We had a Theory U component, we had the trainers to trainers, we had a formal evaluation with a quantitative qualitative tool. You know, we really approach it systemically from the angles that we consider to be highly relevant. But what's the secret of it? We connected 2 and 4. We took the science that we knew. Look at number 2. And this, we had the real pleasure of working with Rafael. It was such a pleasure. Thank you, Rafael. We worked the epidemiology of HIV, the risk vulnerability axis, the prevention schemes. We introduced them. We brought the natural history of it. We brought and discovered and discussed myths and realities, human rights, the legal normativity aspects of HIV. We went through the conventional elements. That we know. We used the science, but we connected to the heart and connected number 4. And we worked on a joint intention, a paradigm, the Theory U really works on, which are the 4 levels of listening. We need to learn to listen through every aspect of what we're doing, in every aspect. Trust containers. Programs are different when trust is built among partners and actors. How do you build a trust container? How do you incorporate it into the nature of science? Mindfulness. How do we teach? How do we facilitate processes so that people can rest their minds and generate new perspectives? What happens when we see the elephant from different perspectives? And always joining theory and practice so that we can do a step into the future. It is said that one of the strong points of Theory U is that we decide from the future and not from the past. So let me go a little deeper into this. When into the tool nature, when we talked about joint intention, it was the discussion. What is guiding us? Pleasure, jumping out of the boat, just allowing the expression and the seek for pleasure, mixing it with risk factors like alcohol, or maybe can we think about health protection at that moment? Can we think about our wives? Can we think about our family? Can we think what that means and what we can do about it? Can we go deep into the nature of thought and source and start exploring these elements and see what they do to us in the midst of information? Connecting it with theory and practice a little further down, can we get organized on the boat and put body type structures so that we get in port regardless of alcohol? That's what we do. We go and that guarantees stoppage at the drugstore to pick up the condoms. You know, what do those interventions in practice tell us about the connection of our life connection and our health connection? Introducing social arts, bringing in music, poetry, embodiment. Can we go back on board and celebrate with music that we actually used a condom? When we're on board, when we're training, when we're working in trust containers, can we discuss prejudice and stigma? Is that possible? Can we go further into that? Connecting Theory U tools with science and consciousness, being careful about that integration, bringing in emotional intelligence allows us to connect heart, head, and hands, mind, heart, and will into social transformation. It is the connection between brain and heart that brings us forward. Let me just share with you in the evaluation one fact, just one, it's number 3. We worked with teachers and psychologists in the academies. And after working with them, we asked them, did you develop the power and confidence to start an HIV/AIDS prevention program in your academy? 82% said yes. They had the connection, they had the motivation, they wanted to do it. It was very, very touching to make phones last week and to discover that in 3 of the academies, they're still going on for the last 3 years. I have trained 3,200 cadets in the connection between theory and science. So what is it that we've learned through these years? This is the invitation. Accept complexity. At one moment or another, bring it into your assessment, bring it into your understanding so that it can guide intervention.
Excuse me, Jose, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to be mindful of the time. It is 15 till, and I'm not sure if you would like to move forward with the breakout rooms or because there's some people that need to leave already.
Okay, this is the last slide. So if I'll just finish it, and then we can go straight into the either the breakup groups or the last plenary, whatever you decide. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So welcome complexity. Build a common intention. When we're all going in the same direction in terms of energy, it goes a lot better for us. It lasts, it's sustainable. It goes into the future. Work with different tools. Integrate head, heart, and will. Balance theory and practice. Reality is the best test. Strengthen the social arts. This has been a pretty amazing discovery for most of us involved in this. And this brings together heart, head, and heart. Okay. So, Don Fernando, Rafael, Maxine, and Cheryl, would you like to go into the breakup groups depending on our times to explore those 4 questions? Or do you want to go straight into a 10-minute plenary?
I would recommend that we just go straight into the plenary because we only have 12 minutes, which we actually went over since we started late. I would suggest if we could just post the questions that Rafael had at the end of his presentation, and then everyone, if you have your questions and comments, then you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. So if I can share my screen and then I can put the question, unless Rafael, you have, if you would like to share your screen since it's your questions and lead with that. I don't want to take away from that.
12 minutos. Don Fernando.
Oh, yes, you are muted, Daisy.
While we think about the questions, and before everybody leaves, I would like to ask Kathy Wabnitz to tell us something about the treat and the opportunity that she's offering to us, because this is really, really, really important. So before we enter into the last plenary and say goodbye to everybody, that will be very short, please go ahead, Kathy, and tell us what you are offering us, the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. So what I've done over the last couple of weeks is developing a renewed Hippocratic Oath, so to speak. I think the Hippocratic Oath hopefully resonates with all of you. It's the oath or pledge that medics originally took when they finished their studies, when they started practicing as doctors. And in modern times, we have something that's called the Declaration of Geneva, which is the adapted version of that. And for me, so I'm interested and passionate about planetary health and the health challenges that we have ahead of us in the Anthropocene. And so I thought whether it wouldn't be possible to actually renew the pledge again, the Declaration of Geneva, and write a new pledge for planetary health. And this is what we did. I asked a couple of experts in planetary health to join. And recently, like 2 weeks ago, we published this proposal of a planetary health pledge in the Lancet. And I will post a link, I guess. I think that's the easiest. And maybe we can have at another occasion a discussion around this pledge and whether it can be used in a multi-pod network, whether people would be willing to take it, whether we can have a discussion around ethics in the Anthropocene, for example, or creating a video of people taking the pledge. Everything would be great. And yeah, this is what I would wanted to do.
Before we open, Kathy, thank you very much. Before we open the floor, let me tell you, Kathy contacted me with this idea of the pledge for planetary health. And I read the text, and this is something so important for all of us that I said, we have to start disseminating this as soon as possible. Please take a look at the pledge. And some of the ideas, Kathy, that perhaps you can do a follow-up is to even have some lapel pins or whatever. The same way they say, I voted, you say, I took the pledge for planetary health. Because you are starting a movement. This is going beyond global health. This is planetary health. And this comes very well linked to everything that we have discussed and everything we have done in our lives. So please continue. We are going to disseminate as much as we can this idea of the pledge, but there should be a way in which it is recognized in any event, and people can have it can show that they have taken the pledge.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that was amazing. Yeah.
So we come to the last part of the meeting, so I don't want to take more of your time. If somebody has to leave, that will be, I mean, it's okay. We have gone over the time, but those who want to stay, we are going to have a final 5 minutes with some ideas that perhaps are going to be useful to all of us. Ideas that you are going to share and ideas that we are going to share. So the ones who want to stay another 10 minutes, that would be great. Because this is an opportunity that we have to hear from people from different parts of the world, from different generations, from different disciplines. And it would be a good idea to have some conclusion for this webinar with so many different approaches. And it's going to take some time to digest what you heard today. It's not going to be easy. So, Ify, you have a question?
Yeah, it's more of a reminder actually. So before people leave, I remember you said something about taking a picture. I think it's more people or taking a
Okay.
I actually already took the picture. So
Okay.
thank you so much for that, Ify.
Okay. That is good.
I do now. I want to take the time and prioritize the questions that were already asked in the chat. And Ify, you had the first question. I think maybe Hans the next, and Miljana, Ana Maria, and I believe that is it. The others have left. So in that order, if we could, please go ahead and unmute your mic and ask the question.
Sure. So he kind of addressed it a bit towards the end of the presentation, because my question was around COVID-19 and its impact on HIV. So since we were talking about looking at things from a systemic perspective, my question was around how is that going to affect HIV? Is it the numbers? Because I think the statistics that he was showing ended in 2019. So I guess I was just already having that forward thinking, wondering how that impacts the numbers now in 2020. But I think he indeed mentioned that the WHO will give the information next year, right? If I'm correct.
At least we expect that by being confined, people who are living with HIV will be more adherent to their treatments. And the fact that adherence makes the viral load undetectable, and therefore people who are undetectable don't transmit the infection to other people, we would expect that this, with less social interaction, would have an impact on transmission. But we don't know. We don't know. We might be having a situation of sexual interaction, pretty much like the cigarette packages that is happening in a concealed manner. So who knows? But we will see in 2-3 months what the actual situation is in this special condition.
Yeah, indeed. And I think also pharma companies are focusing their resources now more on COVID. And so there is decreased supply of HIV medicine and other medicines, I would assume.
Indeed, and politicians too. You see that here in the United States, for example, the official policies to support the pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines and treatments. But the use of the mask is actually not an official policy. And the gentleman in the White House promotes activities in which there are no social distancing. So it's not an official policy.
No, we're keeping our fingers crossed for November then. But
Yeah.
I mute myself now.
Thank you so much, Ify, for your question. And Hans, I know I'm not sure if that was a question or if that was just a comment of you were sharing information.
Yes, it's a comment, but I'm not sure what is the next steps. Will we meet again in a month's time or 2 weeks time or something? But I think it was really useful 2 hours, and I hope we can have a regular, meaningful conversation. I've got some suggestions that I can share with you, but I'm not going to waste time now in terms of the format. But yeah, thank you very much for taking the effort to put this together. Beautiful.
Thank you, Hans. And I think Miljana and Ana Maria had a question. So Miljana?
Hi, I'm here. So my question was about the stigma that follows HIV infection and patients with HIV, especially because in my city, for a long time, there was only one community pharmacy that could give the HIV medications to patients, and they had this specialized part of the pharmacy where there was a big sign that said HIV positive patients. So they were really stigmatized in the entire city and probably all over the world. And that's why I'm asking about data and statistics. Is there any decrease in stigma?
I think that your comment is very, very important. And when we come back to this proposal that Kathy is making about the new Hippocratic oath, we need to reframe stigma and talk about some interventions that were not commonplaces during the times of the Hippocratic times, like the conversion therapy or the mutilation of people with intersex conditions. So your point is very well taken as an input to that proposal.
I would like to add that in Peru, when we were working with the academies, CFARD academies, we're working with the teachers and the psychologists of the academy and how they relate to the cadets. No, we were really trying to go to the root. And I think that's something that was really important within the dialogues and the tools that we used for the intervention. We really opened up the space to discuss stigma. We went into thought and we went into source. And even though it's part of a blind spot in many interventions, I think the invitation is to, really base ourselves on tools that have been validated, experience that have been validated, so that very carefully and with a lot of support and balance, you can go into that. But our experience was that if you start opening up and people talk and, it's that you can deal with the blind spot, a lot of issues come out as we work with vulnerabilities. Many times at the core of it is a sense of vulnerability. And if you balance vulnerability, it allows for a different relationship, especially on board where there was so much discrimination. So I feel very hopeful about the way going forward and about the tools that are being generated to deal with these issues that even 10 years ago were just like totally unavailable.
Okay. Are there any more questions, Shirley?
Maria.
Yeah. I want to add about that discussion. If you mentioned pharmaceutical companies, because I'm pharmacist, and here in Europe, as I heard, it is planned to close like a couple of departments of the one on the global, pharmaceutical companies, which I think is very bad because it's not only the matter of the policy, it's the matter of the, other health issues. So that's one of the biggest problem right now. And my second question is addressing with the cultural differences and how to understand them in terms of sexual and reproductive health. And I give the example of the wearing a purity ring.
Here in the what?
The example of what?
I heard and read about the term purity ring when girl, who didn't have sex before wear a ring. And I saw, I think, one girl. Yeah. Maybe I'm not clarifying enough. Sorry.
No. I have heard about that they
Okay.
were. And boys too. Yeah, it's an evangelical thing. Whereas I think it's important to respect the belief system of people. This doesn't preclude that we give them enough information so they have to form their own opinions. We cannot impose opinions. We cannot remove ideologies, but our obligation is to share enough concrete, specific, and objective information so people can form their own opinions. So we cannot stop people and remove the ring and say, stop doing that thing. That's a violation of their rights. It's a violation of their beliefs, of their principles. But we can give them all the elements so they can make more informed decisions. What we can do and denounce as something inappropriate, even if it's a cultural practice, is anything that goes against the integrity or the physical integrity or the emotional integrity of any human being, like the female genital mutilation. That's unacceptable. So this is not not saying anything when it happens is not going against or respecting the cultural principles. No, that has to be denounced. You and I are going to have a conversation in, I think,
Yes.
2 weeks' time, right?
Yes, I'm happy to see you again. Yeah.
I will expand on this because
I'm prepared the questions on that topic, so can't wait.
Your first question is about this, and I'm going to share with you some of the principles proposed by the World Association for Sexual Health. So you will have a clearer idea of this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Shirley, are we the last part?
Yes, we are definitely at the end. We've had many people that had to leave due to time, but yes, thank you everyone for joining. And now, DZ, you'll be closing us off.
Yeah, okay. Well, as I mentioned, this is and has been a very complex webinar, but that's one of the characteristics of multipod. We want you to suffer and enjoy at the same time. And as I mentioned before, what I would like and what I would advise you to do is to digest some of these concepts. And I will end up showing you just one more slide, and that will be the end of this. Let me see if I can share my, can you see my screen? No, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, just a moment.
Okay, now we can.
Okay, the main point I want to address as a final point is we want you, and you actually are intellectual workers and you think all the time. What I'm going to show you here is something very interesting. It has to do with types of thinking and is related, but in a different way to what we have been talking about. This is a book I came across in the 80s. This is the second edition of Six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono. He's a physician from the island of Malta. And I became familiar with his work in the 80s. He had a book on de Bono's thinking course. And I said, oh, that's very conceited. So I read the book and I said, well, this guy has something to say. And it was really, really different. And then this book about Six Thinking Hats, when I look at that, I thought, well, this is the way we work in a team. You have somebody who looks at facts and figures, the white hat. Somebody is moved by emotions, feelings, impulse. This black hat is the devil's advocate, the person who is always questioning what everybody says. The yellow hat is somebody who goes and says, hey, this is wonderful, let's do it. The green hat is the innovator, the one with the creativity, the imagination to propose something new, the visionary. And finally, you need somebody who is in charge, somebody who can organize, who is a manager and can think about the nuts and bolts of what it takes to conduct, implement and evaluate, design, evaluate, implement and evaluate a project or a program. And all of this, the innovation that he has is that actually, this is something that you can use in a team, but that you can use it at the same time with all the members. If you all think about team groups, the one that we use together is the creativity and innovation, where you say, okay, let's all brainstorm and see if we come with ideas and everything is valid. But we don't do that with questioning. We don't do that with facts and figures, except in some occasions you present that and then everybody discusses. So this method, what it does is reduces the time of discussion, but the intellectual power is then synergic because everybody is thinking about the same. So you don't waste time about disputes on this and other types. You can talk about divergent, linear thinking, systems thinking, all that we have discussed now. But I'm more interested in the functions of thinking. And for that, perhaps we should think as a color wheel in which you have 5 different functions that I think are critical and have to do also with your intelligence. The first one is the critical intelligence, the analytical, the synthetic, the problem solving, and the creative. But more important, the types and function are the results of thinking. And for that, first you have the assessment. You look at something and say, this is wrong, this is right. But then you need to take apart all the pieces, see what they are and how they function, how they interact. That's your analysis. The synthesis is when you take the main concepts, the main ideas, and almost like bullets, you can use them to convey your messages, the main ideas of what you have analyzed. And then you have your solutions. And remember, for each problem, there's at least one solution. We have to look for that. But that's what we are here for. And finally, the other one is invention, creativity, innovation. So I would like for you to remain with this schema, this kind of thinking, types of thinking, functions of thinking, results of thinking. And this is what we try to do today. Present 2 ways in which you can approach problems, in which you can look at the functions. It was defined both by Maxime and by Jose about all the steps that you need. And but in the last instance, what we are interested is in the results of thinking. And my final point is when you think about thinking, what do you think? And the even last question is, how do you think? Because thinking is skill. And sometimes I tell my mentees, wow, stop. Because you young people, you think so fast. You have what is called fluid intelligence that moves so fast. And we old people become wiser because our intelligence has already crystallized. So we still have intelligence, but in a different way. So this was my last message. And I want to thank all of you, our coordinators, Charlie and Shirley, and I presented their bio data, our speakers, and most of all of you who had the patience and the interest to remain with us. I'm going to remind you that at Multipod, we're obsessed with becoming better. And the only way we can become better is if you evaluate what you do. And we do that constantly. So we are going to resend you our 3-minute questionnaire with a plea that you answer the questions today. Takes 3 minutes, And last time I was so disappointed with our young people because less than 50% took the time to answer. So this time I ask you to please help us. And my very last comment, this is the very last, is that the questions that you raise about pharmaceuticals and about some of the issues with pharma, it seems as if you were guessing what we are going to do next month. Because that's exactly the kind of, we're going to have a round table. And round table with the different positions about pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. Because we at Multipod, we are thinkers, and we want to present the diverse opinions and sometimes the opposite opinions regarding one of the issues. So this is something that is going to come next month around the 25th of November. I announced that from now on. So Shirley and all of you, this is the end of our session. And again, thank you very much for your presence and your participation. And Hans, we will be ready for the next one, because one of the questions is, the evaluation is, what portions of this webinar do you think we should expand upon? Because this is not the only time we're going to talk about theory U or systemic thinking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
The survivors.
Bye, thank you very much.
Bye.
Should we stay for